Barron Trump was removed from the European Parliament chamber after being publicly unmasked by IBRAHIM Traoré in front of dozens of international diplomats. The video of the moment when he tried to shout, "This is a conspiracy. My father will destroy you all," while being escorted out by Belgian security, went viral within the first 4 hours, reaching 8 million views. But what few knew was that everything had been meticulously prepared, and Traoré had planned every step in advance. The young Trump thought he would be the protagonist of a new conservative diplomatic front, but he would become a symbol of what happens when arrogance and privilege collide with truth, intelligence, and resolve. The world witnessed the collapse of a political era in real time, and nothing could be more symbolic than the fact that he was exposed by an African leader at the heart of European power. The story begins a week before the collapse, when the European Parliament announced a summit titled Youth and Global Democracy. Among the invited guests were young leaders from different continents, and Barron Trump, now 20 years old and officially a cultural ambassador for his father's 2028 campaign, was invited to represent American youth. The name of IBRAHIM Traoré, president of Burkina Faso, was not originally on the program, but discreetly his team had confirmed his attendance, not as a spectator, but as an active observer, at the invitation of the African Commission for Transcontinental Cooperation. Barron arrived in Brussels days earlier, accompanied by his personal advisors and a small entourage funded by American conservative donors. Off the record, he remarked that this would be the gateway to his international career. He had no idea that a 137-page dossier was ready to be used against him. IBRAHIM Traoré was prepared to go all the way. On the morning of the event, the auditorium was packed. MEPs, young activists, journalists, and community leaders from around the world settled under soft lighting and neatly arranged flags. Barron was announced with pomp. He wore a dark blue suit, a gold tie, and a pin with the colors of the American flag. He smiled for the photographers, greeted some parliamentarians, and took the podium with the confidence of someone who grew up being applauded. "It is an honor to represent American youth here in this historic place," he began. "But it is also my duty to warn about what is to come. The world needs young leadership, yes, but strong leadership, without the weaknesses of globalism. Without romanticizing failed countries, we need to restore order and discipline before it's too late." The applause was tepid. Some diplomats frowned. Others were already anticipating what would come next. "They say Africa is on the rise," he continued. "But what we see is instability, corruption, and leaders who pretend to be revolutionaries while keeping their people oppressed." An ironic laugh was heard. It came from the row reserved for African observers. The camera turned to IBRAHIM Traoré, who, for the first time that morning, moved. He uncrossed his arms, leaned slightly forward, and with a restrained gesture, requested that the microphone at his desk be activated. "Mr. President," said the European moderator, "do you wish to respond to the provocation?" IBRAHIM nodded with a restrained smile. His voice was calm but cutting. "I believe Mr. Trump did not realize that, in trying to insult African leaders, he ended up describing himself more accurately than he imagines. He speaks of discipline and order, but forgets that discipline begins with truth, and that order without justice is just oppression in a nice uniform." Barron smiled with disdain. "With all due respect, Mr. Traoré, I didn't come here to be lectured by someone who governs one of the poorest countries in the world." The silence in the room was absolute. "And yet," IBRAHIM replied, "we have produced more concrete results in the last 4 years than your family has with generations of accumulated wealth." He opened a folder. "A 47% increase in literacy rates, a 38% growth in per capita GDP, a 60% reduction in infant mortality rates. And all this without billion-dollar inheritances, without lobbying, without banks financing us. Just with work, faith, and respect for our people." Barron responded with sarcasm. "Congratulations. But what does that have to do with global democracy?" IBRAHIM then turned a page in the dossier. "Democracy, Mr. Trump, implies public accountability, and I have brought evidence that you violated this principle even before holding any office." He raised a sealed document bearing the Interpol emblem. "This is a technical analysis with transcripts and audio from events you attended in the last 2 years. It includes conversations in which you express racist views about African peoples, proposals for bribes to gain diplomatic access, and attempts to use private parties in Brussels to lure young leaders with promises of political funding. The explosion in the room was immediate. Journalists stood up, phones were raised, flashes went off. "That's a lie," Barron shouted, taking a step forward. "There's no proof of that." "There is, in fact," Ibrahim replied, staring directly at him. "And since you are so confident in your innocence, I invite those present to listen to one of the audios, recorded on February 5th at a dinner in Brussels." The sound was played. The voice was clear. "These Africans are great for photos, but let's see if any of them really understand geopolitics. Deep down, they just want funding." A murmur swept through the chamber. One MEP stood up, another left. Barron began to sweat. "This is manipulation. Those recordings are fake." "Mr. Trump," Ibrahim responded, opening another document. "That recording was authenticated by 3 intelligence agencies. And the most interesting part is that it was provided by someone very close to you, someone who shared your confidence." Barron paled. "Who?" "You'll find out soon enough." Barron looked around, his face burning, his eyes desperately searching for an ally, someone to stand up and say it was all a mistake. But no one moved. The diplomats were silent, the students were stunned, and the journalists had already begun writing the headlines that would sweep the world before the event even ended. The weight of the Trump name, which had always served as a shield, now became an anchor in free fall. Ibrahim wasn't done. "The issue is not just what you think, but what you represent," said the president of Burkina Faso, his face steady on the large screen. "There are young people in every corner of the world believing that being born in a certain cradle is enough to be a leader. That privilege can replace ethics. That influence can silence the truth. But the new generation needs another example." Barron slammed his fist on the table. "This is an ambush. It's a defamation campaign orchestrated by your globalist allies. You can't stand to see a Trump on the world stage." "Perhaps you're right," Ibrahim replied. "We can't stand to see dangerous ideas masquerading as youthful protagonism. We can't stand racism disguised as sincerity, nor manipulation dressed up as leadership. The world doesn't need another famous name in a position of power. It needs responsibility. It needs people who have faced the hard ground of reality, not red carpets." "Lies," Barron was shouting now. "You're making this up to destroy me. You're afraid of me." "In fact," Ibrahim responded with the serenity of someone who has seen worse, "we're afraid of what your impunity could lead to. Because when powerful young people grow up believing they'll never be held accountable, they become dangerous adults." A European Union aide tried to end the session, but Ibrahim interrupted with a calm gesture. "Mr. President," said the moderator, "with all due respect, the Parliament is not prepared to handle this level of tension. It was Mr. Trump who brought tension with his words. I merely brought light," Ibrahim replied. "But I understand your concern. Therefore, to preserve the dignity of this forum, I conclude my participation here, leaving the documents with the Commission for a full investigation." Before the screen went dark, Ibrahim made one final remark, and as for the friend who provided the audios, he left a message. "The world needs to know that the empire of privilege is crumbling, and it's our responsibility to prevent hate from returning to power." Barron didn't respond. He just stared at the floor, motionless. The auditorium emptied quickly, with murmurs and phones in hand. Social media was already buzzing with hashtags like "A Trump Collapse," "Ibrahim Expose," "Racism Unmasked." Within 20 minutes, videos of the confrontation were trending on X, TikTok, and YouTube. Hours later, the U.S. diplomatic residence in Brussels was surrounded by journalists. Anonymous sources reported that Barron had suffered a panic attack and needed to be attended by paramedics. The embassy declined to comment. In New York, Donald Trump received the news with his phone pressed to his ear and his fist clenched. "They're destroying my boy," he said angrily. "Don't let this African win. Don't let them." In Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traoré appeared at a press conference for the African media. A journalist asked if he hadn't been too harsh on a 20-year-old young man. "Harsh?" he replied. "Harsh is growing up in a refugee camp. Harsh is governing a plundered country and still delivering progress. Harsh is watching the world applaud billionaires while ignoring the suffering of millions. Holding someone accountable for their words isn't harshness. It's justice. That same night, African universities issued public statements in support of Traoré. He not only defended his people, he defended the dignity of all historically humiliated peoples. On the other side, silence prevailed. No Republican politician spoke publicly. Donald Trump's advisors tried behind the scenes to contain the storm, but the real bombshell was still to come. 2 days later, the European Commission announced the formal opening of an inquiry into the allegations made by IBRAHIM Traoré. The recordings would be analyzed by forensic experts from 4 countries. The FBI, pressured by public opinion, confirmed it had received requests to evaluate the material. In parallel, American universities began discussing whether to maintain institutional ties with Georgetown University, where Barron was studying international relations. The next morning, the news was even more devastating for the Trump family. Donald's campaign team was informed that key sponsors were temporarily suspending funding until Barron's situation was clarified. In a press statement, the spokesperson for one of the largest political funding groups said, "We do not condone hate speech, regardless of last names." Meanwhile, in the hospital where Barron had been admitted under medical supervision, he refused food, refused visitors, and obsessively repeated, "They can't take me down. I am the future. I am the heir." By the end of that week, the director of Georgetown University appeared in an official statement. "The behavior of student Barron Trump constitutes a serious violation of our code of conduct. The university does not tolerate racism, threats, or manipulation of family influence. Therefore, we announce his indefinite suspension." It was the first time an elite U.S. institution had publicly punished a political heir so clearly. And IBRAHIM Traoré? He was in Maputo, participating in a forum on sustainable agriculture, when a local reporter asked what he thought of Barron Trump's downfall. He smiled briefly. "It's not about him. It never was. It's about what he represents, and what we need to prevent from happening to the world. An arrogant young man can change, but the system that feeds his arrogance must be confronted every day." In Africa, IBRAHIM became a symbol of integrity. In Europe, a reference for courage. In the United States, the division was clear. Many progressive young people applauded him. Conservative sectors demonized him as a traitor to diplomacy. But the fact is that the truth didn't ask for applause or fear. It simply presented itself, raw and unadorned, before a world that for too long accepted lies as protocol. In less than a week, the name Barron Trump went from being a political promise to becoming a cautionary tale. A reminder that being born into a golden cradle is not enough. Gold doesn't cleanse the soul, nor does it buy the collective conscience when words finally find their echoes. That night, an anonymous student left a white flower on the steps of the European Parliament. No note, no signature. Just the flower as a sign of a time that needed to change. Because in the end, what remained was not the collapse, nor the Trump name, nor the headlines. What remained was IBRAHIM Traoré's gaze into the cameras, steady, calm, and relentless, reminding the world that the truth has a voice. And sometimes, it is the voice of an African who decides, fearlessly, to confront the heirs of the empire and defeat them with light, before everyone, without fleeing, without falling.